I think most of us have experienced this as a patient ourselves. So let's say you have to wait 6 weeks for a procedure for your ACL tear, for example. A lot of that has to do with the imbalance of physicians versus patients, etc. But if you don't tighten the operations around making sure that you call the people who need the procedures the quickest, the fastest, early, what you'll have is spillovers onto urgent care, spillovers onto ERs, which increases the overall cost of care. But more importantly, for the patient themselves, everything feels delayed.
There really is that aspect of care delivery where you're using the technology in the right place, and then you're using the human in the right place. And then in certain cases, and what gets me excited is you're using AI to help enhance maybe the scheduler, that human in that place. But really what you're doing is creating intelligent segmentation and intelligent utilization of your most valuable resource, which is people.
All right, we are live. Welcome to 100MS Live. This is a podcast where we talk about everything AI and healthcare. We speak with leaders in patient access, revenue cycle, leaders on the clinical side to understand systems and processes that these folks have built over decades, over years, and how they see AI come in and help augment some of these processes. Quick introduction about me and 100MS. I'm Aniket, one of the co-founders of 100MS.ai. We will voice agents for healthcare operations. I've been on the technology side most of my life, built out large-scale technology infrastructure systems for live audio video at Disney. My co-founder built it at Meta. And over the past few years, we've leveraged that expertise into building 100MS that now powers telehealth across a bunch of US healthcare companies. And now we've been building AI agents on top of that infrastructure to do what a lot of, let's say, your front office admin staff would do at your average provider. Right? As an outsider, as I've come into this space, healthcare is this fascinating piece of operations. It's incredibly complex, where every single piece is super critical. There's usually a patient who's in need of urgent care at the end of every single scheduling process, a reminder process. And just trying to understand and unpack these layers is what I want to do through these conversations. I wanted to unfold some of the most interesting conversations I've had here. I'm very excited to have the first of these conversations with Dr. Lukasz Kowalczyk. Dr. Lukasz has been practicing gastroenterologist for 15 years now. He's one of those rare people who marries this clinical expertise with a fantastic eye for operations. He's been the director of clinical operations at his practice. But the most interesting part about him is he's an entrepreneur who built out a tech startup to solve his own scheduling problems for GI practices. This is fantastic. I've rarely met people who have the grasp of technology, operations, and healthcare clinical know-how and are able to marry them together at such a high level. He's actively involved with HIMSS. Coincidentally, we're at HIMSS in Vegas where we're recording this. And he's also helping run the AI bootcamp at ACHE for HIMSS later this month. Welcome, Lukasz.
Thank you so much. And it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for that very kind introduction, Aniket. I really appreciate it. And becoming and joining your team as an executive strategic advisor has just been a wonderful experience for me, a great learning experience. Both you and your co-founder, Shitich, have an amazing product sense and an amazing customer first type of product discovery knowledge base that is really, it's been really great for me to come and learn from and to see, especially in a space as dynamic as AI. I think you guys really are bringing like the right type of framework to helping develop this technology. So it's been a real pleasure and thank you for having me on today.
Thanks, and thanks for the kind words. I think, Lukasz, it's been very much a two-way street. I think the stuff that we've learned from you has helped us shape of how we think of product, how we think of introducing AI within healthcare. Take the beginning of, let's say, the patient's journey and then the healthcare operations, the scheduling side. That's a piece you've looked at in most detail. I feel you have some of the most strongest viewpoints I've heard of the entire piece. Just help us understand what scheduling means within the healthcare context and just to give some overview of.
Yeah, absolutely. The key is targeting a problem that is worth solving And scheduling is absolutely one of those problems, especially on the procedure scheduling side, but just like overall patient access. It's an important problem to look to solve because it's so tied in to the revenue of the practice, but it's also great patient care. But there are so many things that need to converge together. You need both operational excellence and clinical excellence to come together to get that patient through an entire funnel. And I think having a little bit of a business background helps me think about scheduling like it is like a sales funnel, essentially, right? And a sales funnel works because it's already a proven strategy to move a customer through a particular process. And you start broadly, but then you start narrowing and getting more specialized through that process. So for a patient, let's say that they're getting their procedure scheduled, like a colonoscopy, there needs to be some sort of outreach. You got to know that customer is out there. That typically occurs through a referral. Then you got to contact that customer and see, are they interested in scheduling? What do they want to do? When do they want to do it? That's an entire process because you have to also merge a very technical set of knowledge to get them scheduled. And so just to give everyone context, who is a scheduler? You're typically an hourly worker. And in terms of medical literacy, they're not required to have any type of degree. They're not a medical assistant. They can be, but they're not required to. And so their level of medical literacy is probably on the lower end, but yet they're managing like one of the most important processes for a single specialty practice. It's their biggest revenue generating business year, right? And so they need a lot of specialized knowledge, but as with hourly workers, it can be a lot of turnover. So it becomes a challenge there. And then once they're scheduled, the whole concept of customer success and getting them from scheduling, getting them to their procedure and following instructions and doing everything correctly, that's a whole nother process. So I think we got a lot to talk about basically, and I'm really excited.
All right. I love this framing. I think on startup side, there's a well-known construct of having customer funnels. So you have acquisition. You typically have your customer coming in. Let's say, for example, a GI practice, you would typically have a referral that would come through a PCP saying that this patient requires, let's say, for example, a colonoscopy, right? Yeah, so that's your initial referral. This is the lead that you have.
Yep, that's right.
Post this, now you need to acquire these leads, have them walk in through the door and have them actually come in.
You got it.
Talk to us how this process happens, because I don't think a lot of people understand how complex just taking a referral to getting the patient into the door is just awkward.
I'm always surprised, at least in medicine, like how this concept of a cold lead versus a warm lead, and you really definitely want to qualify your lead. In some ways, there's every lead that comes in or every patient that comes into a referral basket. Just imagine this like a basket of referrals that like all your referring physicians send patients to, and you get them and you put them in this bucket. That bucket is a very general bucket. They're qualified, but really you don't know who really wants the procedure, I don't want this at all. And schedulers basically dial a lot of phone numbers, not knowing who they're calling. Essentially, they just know I have a referral in, but there's no intelligence around it. There's no segmentation. And from what I've seen, a lot of inefficiency to segment appropriately and to really target who that scheduler should spend their precious time scheduling.
I think most of us have experienced this as a patient ourselves. So once, let's say you have to wait 6 weeks for, let's say, a procedure for your ACL tear, for example, those 6 to 8 weeks, a lot of that has to do with the imbalance of physicians versus patients, etc. But there's also a lot of inefficiency in just the person who's figuring out, or the systems that are around that person who's figuring out, hey, this person needs urgent care. There's, let's say, a room available. There's the full supporting operations available, and this person's already pre-qualified. Let's get them to walk it quickly. Versus, let's say, for example, someone who's not super urgent is just looking at this exploratory procedure. Maybe you can schedule it later. All of these things, if you don't improve, let's say, tighten the operations around making sure that you call the people who need the procedures the quickest, the fastest, early, what you'll have is spillovers onto urgent care, spillovers onto ERs, which increases the overall cost of care. But more importantly, for the patient themselves, everything feels delayed. It feels, oh, why is this procedure going to, it's 4 weeks away, 6 weeks away. Why can't it be like, let's say, something I order off of Amazon and it comes back in, let's say, a week and a half? I know that's unfair comparison, but that's the kind of service that you've gotten used to. A lot of that is how efficiently you run these operations. And what we've seen in practices across the country, and so to give you some context, we've been deploying scheduling AI agents in a bunch of practices across the country. Even in the most efficiently run operation systems where you'll have some level of classification of the leads initially, there's insurance discovery that's happened where, okay, this patient's qualified, eligible, let's call this patient earliest. Even in the best run operations, a scheduler typically spends only 22% of their time talking to a patient trying to schedule them for a person. This is because you're reaching out to a person cold, and if they are not expecting a call, they will not pick it up. They will say, oh, call me back at this time. They'll let it go to voicemail. It takes 4 to 5 calls for a single call to get connected. You might be calling them at 8 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, then the next day at 12 noon until you finally get there. And in a lot of cases, you won't even be able to successfully get there. In a lot of practices, your schedulers will double up as front office staff. If they are spending 8 hours of their workday behind phones trying to call these people up, but only 2 hours of that is effectively being spent on call scheduling. The rest is just going to voicemails or phones that don't pick up. Those 6 hours are better utilized being in front of patients, looking at more important things as classifying patients into risk profiles, trying to figure out who to schedule first, who not to schedule first. Things where there's more value to be added as opposed to just going through a list of patients directly. I think this is where, for example, AI agents can come in and do a lot of this work. So we've all heard of generative AI. Now, most people are using generative AI in some way. Scribing transcription has gotten into most physicians' lives already. Some of you might have already experimented with chat GPT's voice conversation modes, but taking that technology and understanding which process to use it for within the healthcare system, I think this is, for example, an ideal use case. There's this flat file of leads that you need to call through, get some preliminary information in, use that to classify them into scheduling buckets, and then pass it off to humans or schedule it directly, like whichever way you want to do it. Once AI agents can do, let's say, these 2 hours worth of phone calls, and look, AI agents can do this as patiently as many times as they want. They don't have to be frustrated by the 6 hours of hold times or failed calls, for example. That allows your front office staff, if these people can get from behind phones onto other processes, onto other more value-added stuff in front of patients. These AI agents are ideal for this. These are not very complicated conversations. There isn't a lot of high-risk conversations happening here. You can always escalate anything that's super urgent to a human, but there is a lot of conversations that need to happen.
I think that explanation is so comprehensive. It goes to show you as a company how well you've understood that the problems that schedulers are facing, but also the problems that the patients are facing as well. And that in and of itself is a really high value pain point. But what we imagine the workflow looks like is that, number one, the agent is reaching out to the patient, and basically the agent is acting as a qualification system, right? Telling them, do you want to schedule now? Do you not want to schedule now? And getting the agent to do the work of figuring out, should the scheduler be paying attention to this particular patient? Because if the voice agent reaches out to the patient and the patient's, yes, I want to schedule, then now you know you have a warm qualified lead and you want to get them in and you want to get the scheduler on the phone. And so the voice agents can do this type of work at scale. So yeah, I think that's a very good initial use case just by itself.
This technology is ready. It's already improving efficiencies across the board. And if you guys are running practices, if you guys are running scheduling or operations teams or patient access team, do check this out. I think this technology is ready to be deployed. The other thing that, Lukasz, you've taught us, and it is super important, is what we realize is most practices, not all of them, but most practices stop at scheduling the person. Right? Once you schedule, let the patient walk in on the day. This 24 weeks away, 6 weeks away, 2 weeks away. This isn't typically, let's say, your experience with something else that you do where you'd get reminders, where you'd have people walk you through. That's it. And these are complex procedures. You have to dedicate a certain part of your life to this. Just help me understand. You talk about this as customer success within healthcare.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I think that there's this full element, again, like walking through the funnel, right? You get the customer onboarded through the scheduling process, which we haven't talked a lot about. That's an incredibly complicated process, especially in like the GI space or high volume procedure spaces. There's a lot of complex medical information that needs to be managed at scale. There's a lot of overlap. So that part is complicated. But once you get them scheduled, like the de facto practice of medicine is just kind of stop there. So we got the patient scheduled, they're on the schedule, and we're done. But that's not how successful businesses work in real life, because in every other business, there's an entire customer success aspect that's responsible for, once that customer signed up, that they have a good experience. But that's really non-existent in medicine currently. And I think you guys can talk a lot about how agents in that technology can address that.
So you're one of the first ones who hooked us up onto this. And when we've talked about doing pre-procedure education calls, reminder calls, it feels like there's some kind of standard, either text messages that go out usually where you leave it at that. But I've heard varying numbers, single digit, double digit last day cancellations just because the patient's either forgotten that the appointment is there, or they didn't, let's say, stop eating a day before, or they did stop some of their BP medication before coming in. Then let's say an AI agent's calling you at T-1 week, explaining the process. -2 days, confirming, hey, have you arranged a cab to go back? Is there someone who's coming along with you? Please make sure that you have this much amount of time freed up. Just doing that will reduce your last day cancellations. And last day cancellations are super, super expensive.
Oh, it's the worst. Everyone wants to reduce those. There's a small percentage of those that happen, but you still have a lot of room on the patients that are experiencing problems that you can intervene on, because a lot of those last day cancellations, there's things that are occurring ahead of time, right? And if you have a more proactive and hopefully automated way to reach out to those patients and be much more proactive in finding out what those problems are, you can, number one, be much more efficient. And I think a good analogy here is like a hotel, right? If there's a problem with the reservation and a person drops off out of that room, because you can think of every slot in a schedule like a hotel room.
Yeah.
When that patient drops out, you want to fill that slot back in as quickly as possible, right? So that's where you start building a model for ROI, right? You lose a patient, but you proactively then can reach out, find out early on in the process that there's a problem, and fill that slot with another one. So the case for ROI builds itself.
Reducing those last day cancellations, getting it to the point where the hotel room analogy that you talk about, one of these slots gets, let's say, filled out, you have other backfills to move them back in.
Exactly.
These are processes that even the best practices of the health system that we've seen that closely approximate this hotel level of sort of efficiency. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. For that, they do need to invest in this massive sort of training of their own schedulers, front office staff, able to use these systems to be able to do this. And that comes with its own challenges. Maintaining this big a team where you're constantly training them, retraining them, these process documents or SOPs that you would have, they can run into pages and pages. If, for example, a patient says 3 days before that they aren't able to come in, if 7 days before their prior auth hasn't come in, then do this. Like these complicated rule sets, onboarding any person onto this takes a few months where they are able to run it at full efficiency.
That's right. And again, remember this employee set and hourly workers, there's a lot of turnover. So you're losing people. And then it's not only building out these workflows, but also updating them and maintaining them can be very tricky. So it's delivering that consistent experience, because there's, again, such an obvious and easy place when you want to create interventions with AI, right? You want the painkillers.
Yeah.
And again, I think you guys are really leading the front because you understand the customer segment so well and have such a great ground level approach to understanding the problem and a very practical approach to that.
One of the things that we figured out is the moment you start doing some of these reminder calls, or let's say, for example, education calls, our AI systems won't be able to do what humans would do end to end, right? Maybe we handle 65, 70, 75% of the use cases.
Yeah.
For the last 25%, someone who requires a little more handholding, someone who needs some financial program assistance and need to get through that. What our systems have do is then leverage the same staff to then work through these more difficult cases to get those people access to care, have them come into the system instead of having them just drop off. I think that's the knock-on effect. That's been even more rewarding than just making these processes run efficiently, seeing that the last 20-25% cases where there's a lot of handholding required and human intervention required, you can essentially free up the same bandwidth by just having AI do a lot of the routine stuff like reminders, education, checks, all of these things.
Again, another key point that you're raising there is it really is that aspect of care delivery where you're using the technology in the right place, and then you're using the human in the right place. And then in certain cases, and what gets me excited is you're using AI to help enhance maybe the scheduler, that human in that place. But really what you're doing is creating intelligent segmentation and intelligent utilization of your most valuable resource, which is people, right?
Yep.
It's your biggest cost center.
100%.
And I think when everyone talks about utilizing AI, how are you going to start getting the benefits and maximizing it? It's there. To give you a great use case, in GI, there's the 45, 50-year-old healthy patient that just needs to get a screening colonoscopy. I do foresee a potential to just schedule that person without any human contact whatsoever, right? Like kind of Amazon style, right? When that patient needs more, that the human is going to be involved in that care on a more granular level. If there's a more complicated patient or the scheduler is getting off track, the AI can help actually reinforce them, right? They could get them back on that protocol. It's, oh, this patient has complicated heart failure. Oh, then the AI can reinforce them if they're not, if the scheduler is getting off the talk track a little bit or not following the protocol. This technology is pretty well used in the online meeting space, right? You get feedback about like how much you're talking.
Yep.
This is a well-established technology. You're just repurposing it for even higher value, essentially.
So when you're doing software sales or any kind of sales or customer success kind of process, let's say, for example, that Amazon would be recording all of the calls that a customer support representative or a salesperson is going through, and then surfacing intelligence on top of this. Oh, this is where your salespeople aren't answering a specific question about a specific objection that comes up. This layer is well understood in software sales, some of the other industries. This hasn't been uncovered yet within the healthcare. Just talk to us about what you mean by this data layer or the analytics layer.
Yeah, I think there's an entire data layer across this whole process that is undiscovered, is currently invisible, and can really be unlocked with AI. To me, voice is one of the biggest opportunities for data discovery and intelligence across healthcare. It's something that is completely underutilized and underexplored in that capacity. So when that scheduler is talking, imagine that scheduler now getting real-time feedback, a summary of how they're talking. I think this is where it really helps me having a business background. It's like, how do you run a top-level sales team? You coach them. Yep. You coach a sales team about the scripts. You reinforce what they're doing well. You help give them feedback on things that they improve on, but also I think there's an opportunity for collective intelligence across a good sales team. You have the opportunity to even role play, right? There's the opportunity to learn from your colleagues. Hey, what is my colleague over here doing? Why are they crushing it on their interactions and I'm not? I think there's just so much intelligence. And this is just scheduler side. What about the patient side? About automating some workflows. Hey, I need to cancel my procedure. And that agent just takes care of it, gets them off the schedule, notifies the scheduler that there's an empty slot, and you're just filling that schedule with intelligence. I get very excited and passionate about this because at the end of the day, everyone's a winner here. This is like the definition for me of clinical enterprise value. You're generating the clinical need of patient access, getting patients scheduled for procedures that they need with a limited resource, and it's driving the enterprise side of the equation where there's clear value tied to that process. And that's why it's so exciting for me because both parties, everyone's winning in that equation and the incentives are perfectly aligned. And I just love that. I'm excited for you. I want to see that happen.
So this coaching that I talk about, there's a sort of mid-sized health system that we'd been talking with. They were trying to work with us on this one campaign where they reach out to a small subset of their population. Now, this is a procedure that's covered by the payer, where they're calling these patients up and say, hey, why don't you come in for these procedures? And that requires some amount of convince, right? So they wanted to see some of our AI agents could somehow do some of this convincing. The interesting piece is we start talking to some of their current people who were making these calls, and the person who was running the project said, "Hey, look at Brian Scott's. He's fantastic. He's just able to pull people in. I'll give him 10 people to call through, 7 of them will come through." So we heard those recordings. We went up to Brian, we asked Brian, "What are you doing?" And Brian was this super passionate person about their job. Now, what they'd done is they'd read up this thing called motivational interview, which is like a well-known topic, but it was fascinating. Medicine is a well-known, it's a very well-known topic. And he had basically changed the script to essentially acknowledge what the person is saying, motivate them, and sort of nudge them into the procedure. Now, everybody in the organization knows that Brian is doing this really well, and theoretically, you all know that he's maybe using motivational interviewing. But having, let's say, all of these calls recorded and maybe an AI system to oversee the insights from this will allow, for example, automated changes in scripts. Essentially, all your callers become close to or become the best possible version of the caller in your audience.
Like thinking in terms of broad category, what are you doing now? You're now managing enterprise level knowledge and distributing it in an automated way. So again, I think one of the hardest things to do is because performance is on a bell curve, and you're going to have the people always that are in that second and third standard deviations, right? And you have those performers. What you really want to do as an organization, as an enterprise, you want to raise your average, right? Because shifting the average, that's hard to do because that means that you have achieved a level of consistent performance that is above and beyond where you were at scale.
Yep.
And that is a very hard thing to do. And that's where I see the potential for ROI occurring because you're now scaling performance across your lower third to middle third. And that's where I think we're going to see the biggest gains. You're going to start leveling people up and getting a better level of performance from those lower end to mid-range type of staff members, and maybe even pushing a couple more over, becoming like hyper performers, because what they were missing was consistent and appropriate feedback from the system.
Yep.
Because that's also a whole thing unto itself. So there's so much here to unpack, so many great high value use cases across the board. And I think the big thing is you guys have spent time understanding these workflows and really doing a great job of understanding the customer needs across the board.
And like a lot of these things we've understood through our customers, a lot of things you've helped us understand. Now, let's assume there's an owner of a practice, someone who leads patient access at a health system. They're convinced that they want to introduce AI agents in either scheduling, reminders, customer success, one of these. How do you think they should go about choosing the right vendor for their use case?
Yeah, there's obviously so many companies out there, right? Stepping back, this is not a mature technology yet, right? Everyone in enterprise healthcare is used to 20 years of standard cloud computing. Build the app, deploy it to the cloud, scale it, it works. It's fine. And that's what everyone's used to. Everyone's used to point, click, everything works. That's not the world we live in anymore. And like this technology is coming out like every single day. It's a fire hydrant, right? And you're trying to drink from it. One of the problems that I'm seeing is that applying the enterprise deployment playbook when you need a much more agile type of company. Ideally, I think you want a company that has founders that have worked in the healthcare space, understand the regulations, are familiar with the intricacies of healthcare, but are still small enough and agile enough that you can work directly with the founders as a partnership, right? Because a lot of this is based on data, right? And you don't want to be working through some middle manager. You want to work closely with the executive team to make sure that they understand your needs, because they're the ones that also need to work with this technology. The Open API from OpenAI came out in October. I think you could say this, that everyone's on a learning curve here. And I don't think incumbent enterprise companies are naturally suited from an organizational perspective to be able to partner that quickly and have that degree of agility that you need. And they have too many layers of abstraction between themselves and the real decision makers.
So this is something that we've been seeing constantly, and there's a philosophy that you talk about. We don't work with a lot of clients. We work with a few clients, but we work with them deeply. Even voice AI agents right now is not at the place where I can have my customer success person, my account manager, go and work with a customer directly and have improved their last day cancellations by 6% day on day. Can I just deploy an agent that will just about work, but actually not deliver any ROI? Yeah, sure. But if you have to figure out who the Brian within the organization is, who's doing the best calls, what's the accent, what's the tone, what's the script that works for that particular community, what rules a particular location in a group follows. Unless you take all of these into account, sort of the cookie cutter solution, there'll be a lot of what we would call escalations and unresolved cases that would go up to this. For solving the last 25%, where someone says, I'm happy talking to this agent, I don't want to talk to a human because this agent is doing exactly the things that I wanted to do in a way I appreciate it doing. You need to understand the population, the demographics, the processes very deeply. You need to integrate very deeply. I think that is the only way you have successful AI rollouts at this point. But some of the technologies have become more mature. For example, scribing's been around for now a couple of years at least. It's become a little more mature.
I really like the fact that you're alluding to the aspect of personalization, because I think that there's another great opportunity to really personalize the patient experience here. You mentioned accents. I think if you're in a community, you want to talk to people that sound like you. And I think that's a really important aspect and an advantage of building trust in that entire experience. And so I think there is that potential for agents to do that. Now you have to be careful because you don't want to make it sound stereotypical. Like here is going to be some of the art and design to this whole process. You got to be careful on how that sounds, but there is this incredible element and opportunity for personalization and then empathy as well.
So the idea is not to be not transparent and say this is not AI. But the moment you hear an agent who sounds like you, who's comforting, who has empathy, I think even the most skeptical populations, let's say, for example, an older person who's receiving this call, they tend to talk more because this is a phone call in a voice and a tone and a script that they're more comfortable with. I think it's one of the better vessels for AI to reach a lot of this more skeptical pop.
I agree with you. These agents are not going to experience compassion fatigue, and so they can respond empathetically. There's also the design of that system. There's going to be a lot of art there, monitoring the system, making sure that everything sounds genuine and not trite or patronizing in any sort of way. So I think there's going to be a lot of blending of art in that aspect as well. But there's a tremendous amount of potential possibility that I'm really excited about creating a more personalized experience for patients in this process.
100%. This is what gets us up every morning. These agents, just seeing them getting deployed, honestly, we be pleasantly surprised at how receptive patient population, payer agents, whichever side you want to call, their experience with AI agents, like their acceptance of these AI agents has been tremendous. So we are super excited with this mission.
Yes, absolutely.
Thanks, Lukasz, so much for
It's a pleasure.
this.
Yeah.
You've started a company on these topics. You've written thousands and thousands of words on these topics.
Yes.
It's been fantastic how you do.
Yo, thank you so much. It's just been a pleasure working with you guys, and I hope we're going to have a lot more good conversations around this and continue to grow this space out and impact patients and practices equally and have a great experience.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Lukasz.
Thank you.